Hello, and welcome to another review. Today's film is going to be The Smashing Machine, starring Dwayne Johnson and Emily Blunt. I must admit that prior to watching this movie, I did not know anything about Mark Kerr. I had never heard of Mark Kerr, although I am a little bit familiar with the UFC. I've watched some of the John Jones fights, among other fighters. But going into this movie, I did not know much about Mark Kerr's life. This film is a biopic, essentially about Mark Kerr, and it talks about some of the struggles that he went to, as well as highlighting his life and his contributions to the UFC and to what it is today. With that said, let's go ahead and talk about some of the positives for this movie. I don't think you can talk about this movie without talking about Dwayne Johnson and his amazing performance as Mark Kerr. This is a gritty performance. This is a performance that is unlike his previous movies. In this role, he's playing a dramatic, emotional, gritty character, and we see that displayed on screen. And it's something that I hope he has more opportunity to continue to dig deep into these type of roles, because it was great to see, and it really goes to show that how far his acting has come across these many years that he's been in movies. And there was one particular scene where he's in a hospital room and he's talking to one of the older ladies that's there and kind of explaining his sport, what he does, and the etiquette of his sport, and how he fights for a living, essentially. And the fact that he doesn't hate anyone that he fights, and the fighters don't hate each other. And he's really careful and articulate in the way he describes the sport to someone who's much older and someone who doesn't quite understand what the sport is. And I thought that scene was very, very deep and meaningful, and something that I was thinking about as the movie ended. Additionally, this movie does a pretty good job at its attention to detail and recreating real life moments, whether it's press conferences, his walk up to the octagon or the ring, and even some of his controversial moments, such as, his addiction, his going to rehab, domestic abuse. It shows it all, albeit sometimes to the show's detriment, but the movie nonetheless definitely is respectful and very sincere when it's showing the life of Mark Kerr, especially to someone that I didn't know much about. Unfortunately, the movie as a whole didn't exactly answer the question to who Mark Kerr was, other than some of the highlights that he's a fighter. He had addiction problems, and there was massive domestic violence with his then girlfriend. In fact, the movie follows three basic storylines. Essentially, there's his addiction and going to rehab. There's his toxic relationship, which gets to the point of pretty annoying, and they constantly are fighting throughout the movie, and it doesn't really add anything to the movie. It's not like it's a supporting thing or something that they work through in the movie. It's just the characters just being relatively rude to one another, toxic. And lastly, there's the storyline of his friendship with Coleman, who, by the way, is a very good addition to this movie. Other than Dwayne Johnson, Coleman, the friend, that character was really great. If anything, that was one of the three stories that added to this movie and didn't, I feel like, take away anything. So yeah, the movie kind of focuses on those three areas, but more so on the first two, and it kind of neglects the whole thing of the relationship with Coleman, and how at the very end, the drama surrounding that Coleman and Mark Kerr may have to fight each other in order to be positioned as the greatest fighter in the world. I felt like if the movie leaned more into that, more into their friendship leading up to the finale, the movie would have been better, and maybe less focused on some of the domestic violence stuff. And I understand, showing it shows the real life situation of Mark Kerr, but that doesn't necessarily have to be drawn out throughout the movie. And yeah, in terms of the fighting in this movie, I didn't think was spectacular. And this is coming from someone who admittedly didn't know whether or not Mark Kerr won or lost these fights. And I think that was because the directorial decision for this movie wasn't to necessarily focus on the fights, but instead focus on those three distinct stories of Mark Kerr's life that I've said before. And unfortunately, by the time you get to the fighting, it's very quick. It's only on screen for, when I was watching it, it felt like only a few minutes, if anything, like 30 seconds, and then the match or the round would be over. And unlike other sport movies, usually the fights are highlighted. They're these spectacular events. You grow with the character, and then you see them in the ring or octagon or whatever, and you're cheering them on, you're rooting for them, you're seeing the toll, the damage done on their bodies. But in this movie, that's not necessarily where the focus was. And I definitely experienced this during the fight scenes that are in this movie. And perhaps, this movie wasn't made for someone like me who didn't know much of anything about Mark Kerr. Maybe if I was an avid UFC watcher and I knew Mark Kerr's backstory and everything, maybe I would have enjoyed this movie a little bit better and appreciated some of the other aspects of his life. But not having that kind of background information, I didn't feel like the story was that captivating. And I honestly don't know if general audiences are going to appreciate this particular story of Mark Kerr. And in the end, unfortunately, I don't think I learned that much about Mark Kerr's life or his then girlfriend, other than the fact that they're toxic to one another, mean to one another. I did learn that Kerr fights people and is nice at times, but at other times can be quite dramatic and rude. And let's be frank, pretty horrible. And of course, he had his addiction to pain medications that he had to overcome. But in the end, I didn't know much about the man that is Mark Kerr. And I feel like for a movie that is a biopic about a person, I should definitely know more about them than what I walked away with from this film. So in the end, I would have to rank this movie, despite The Rock's amazing performance, I would have to rank this movie a 2 out of 5 stars. It's a movie that doesn't necessarily know what it wants to be. And it's a movie that, in my opinion, focuses on other aspects of Mark Kerr's life that doesn't necessarily add anything to the movie. And if it would have focused more on his relationship with Coleman and highlighted some of the fighting and less on his relationship, then I think this movie would have been perceived a lot better for me. And I think I would have walked away with a greater appreciation, as well as just focusing and spending more time on Mark Kerr, the man. We do get a little moment there at the end where he's grocery shopping and the movie ends with, "This is Mark Kerr, you should know his story." And honestly, if they added more scenes like that at the end throughout the movie and like little moments of silence or just moments where we're just following him in his daily life, I think this would have added more to the movie than what we ended up getting. So yeah, that is my review on The Smashing Machine. Let me know what you thought below. If you're a huge UFC fan, did this movie work for you? Did it fill in some of those gaps that you didn't already previously know? And if you're not into UFC, did you have some of the same feelings that I had? And were you amazed by The Rock's performance, but kind of disappointed in the movie overall? Regardless of what you thought, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time on Film Sense with Brian.